Rhaegar Targaryen stood at the highest balcony of the Red Keep, staring out over the city he would one day rule. The fires of King's Landing glowed in the distance, thousands of lanterns and torches flickering like scattered stars upon the dark horizon. The distant sound of merriment rose through the winding streets, unaware, perhaps, that the future they believed set in stone was coming undone with the thoughts spinning inside the Crown Prince's mind. His silver-gold hair was drawn back from his face, the lines of worry and hope etched faintly around his violet eyes. It was here, in this solitude, that he contemplated how to save the realm from his father's madness. He had known for years that the man perched upon the Iron Throne was no longer the father he once respected. Each day, King Aerys II Targaryen descended further into rage and paranoia, and each day, Rhaegar felt his shoulders grow heavier with the knowledge that it would be up to him to restore justice and peace. A ripple of tension had been slowly winding its way through the Seven Kingdoms. Whispers spread about the king's unhinged behavior, outbursts in the throne room, vile punishments for minor slights, an obsession with wildfire. The lords of Westeros found themselves caught between fear and allegiance. Yet there were those like Tywin Lannister, once the king's hand, who had retreated from court in disgust. There were the northern lords who rarely ventured south but who still heard rumors of the king's cruelty. And there was a young lord of Storm's End, Robert Baratheon, who had been betrothed to Lyanna Stark, one of the few bright spots in the gloom that was settling over the realm. Robert was a man of action, of powerful swings of his warhammer, of open laughter and even more open displays of loyalty to those he loved. In another life, one that the gods themselves must have shaken their heads at, he might have fought Rhaegar to the death. Yet fate had other designs. It had all begun in earnest when Rhaegar realized that if Westeros were to be saved, he must bring an end to the rule of his father. But for such an act to occur, the prince knew that he would need powerful allies. He possessed a circle of loyal friends, Ser Arthur Dayne and Prince Lewin Martell among them, but to truly topple Aerys, he needed the realm behind him. And there was no man in Westeros who commanded devotion quite like Robert Baratheon. The Storm Lord was popular, strong, and fearless, but more importantly, he was engaged to Lyanna Stark of Winterfell, forging a powerful tie to the north. The Tullys, the Arryns, the Starks themselves, so many might listen if Robert was the one who spoke for Rhaegar. Thus, the prince's greatest challenge was convincing Robert to join him rather than to stand against him. It was late one night after a lavish feast at the Red Keep that Rhaegar made his first quiet foray into forging this alliance. He sought out Robert, who was at a table near the back of the grand hall, his booming laughter rising above the mild tinkle of cups and the dying notes of a minstrel's ballad. Rhaegar hesitated for just a moment as he stood in the torchlit shadows, for Robert was not a man known for moderate opinions. He loved fiercely and hated fiercely. Would he hear out the man whose name carried the blood of the dragon, the same line that had tormented the realm of old? Robert seemed to sense the prince's presence, turning with a conspiratorial grin as if an old friend had arrived. "Prince Rhaegar," Robert said in that hearty voice of his, rising from his bench and half-staggering in a manner that suggested he was deep in his cups. There was no trace of venom in his tone, nor animosity, only a robust greeting. "Join me for a drink, will you? I've wine here that could cure any ill or create more, depending on your constitution." Rhaegar forced a polite smile, nodding graciously. "I appreciate the invitation. May I have a moment of your time, my lord? In private." At that, Robert's dark eyebrows rose. He glanced about at the men and women clustered around him, some old companions, some hanger-ons drawn by his affability, and he seemed to size up the strangeness of the prince's request. Then, he gestured to his companions to leave. A row of them bowed or muttered courtesies to the prince before withdrawing, leaving Rhaegar and Robert in a quiet circle of torchlight. The moment the prince sat across from Robert, the Storm Lord refilled both of their cups. "What is it you want from me, Prince?" Robert asked, voice low and still touched with the easy grin he wore so naturally. "Rumor has it you're nearly as accomplished a warrior as I am, though your harp is said to be your deadliest weapon." He chuckled, teasing but not disrespectful. Rhaegar took a breath. He had prepared for this moment for weeks, rehearsing the words, yet none of that practice felt sufficient. Lord Baratheon, I believe we both love this realm. I believe we both want a just king upon the Iron Throne, one who will not threaten the lives of his people with wildfires and tyranny. Robert froze for a moment, a flicker in his eyes that spoke of suspicion, but also curiosity. Are you saying what I think you're saying? Rhaegar nodded and let the gravity of those unspoken words hang between them. It is not easy to say, but I have come to realize that my father is not fit to rule. Indeed, his destructive impulses grow worse by the day, and I fear for my family's legacy and for the realm itself. Robert's calloused fingers tapped the side of his wine cup. I've heard the tales, he said, his voice gruff but measured. He did terrible things to Rhaegar and Brandon Stark. Burned them alive, or so goes the rumor. Is that rumor true? His dark eyes searched Rhaegar's face, as if looking for a deeper truth. Rhaegar nodded, remorse etched in his features. It is true. I had begged my father to show mercy, but he refused all pleas. Rhaegar Stark demanded trial by combat, and my father's twisted notion of justice was to pit him against fire itself. There was nothing I could do. Robert's jaw twitched, the hatred for King Aerys tightening the lines of his face. Then how do you think you and I will find common ground, Prince? I was not raised to bend the knee to a Targaryen who kills my betrothed's family. My friend Ned lost his father and brother to that madman. There's blood on your family name. Rhaegar sighed. I know. That is why I have come to you. I will not pretend to be free of blame. My father's sins must be accounted for. But I swear to you, I want to end his reign of madness. I want to prevent him from harming any more innocent men. I want to restore the Targaryen name to its old luster, if that is even still possible. I cannot do that without the lords of the realm, and I cannot do that without you. For a long moment Robert said nothing. His large, muscled hand cupped the wine. He cast a glance around the hall, checking if any ears were too close, then leaned in, eyes narrowed. You are speaking of treason. He spoke the word quietly, but with enough weight to underscore the gravity of it. Rhaegar did not flinch. Yes, he said in a near whisper. If I succeed, it will be a reformation of the realm. If I fail, I will have my head mounted on a spike. But the only alternative is allowing my father to continue, and that I cannot abide. Robert exhaled slowly. Say I join you. What becomes of my betrothal to Lyanna Stark? Are you going to keep your father from interfering in that too? There was a barb in his voice, alluding to the rumors that Rhaegar had once cast longing glances at Lyanna. None of that was more than court gossip, or so Robert liked to believe, but it still stung. Rhaegar said, Your betrothal to Lyanna stands, of course. I have no intention of undoing that bond. I want alliances between the great houses, not enmities. He paused, reading Robert's stern demeanor. I know how you feel about her. I do not ask you to trust me with everything, only enough to see that together we might rid the realm of a tyrant. Robert slowly nodded, though his expression had grown more serious. His voice dropped to a hoarse whisper. You are the crown prince. If we do this, you will take the throne. And you will swear on your name, your honor, your gods, that you will not become the next mad king. Rhaegar placed his hand upon his heart. I vow it, and if it helps you to believe me, we shall also speak with Jon Arryn, Eddard Stark, Hoster Tully, whomever you trust. Let them see the sincerity of my cause. I do not wish to be a tyrant, nor do I wish to follow the same path as my father. If I fail in my duty as king, let the realm rise and cast me down. The sincerity in the prince's voice was undeniable, and Robert was a man of instincts. He had never thought himself a cunning plotter of crowns, but he valued courage, and this idea blazed with a certain justice. The North will want vengeance, he said roughly, swirling his cup. Those who followed the Starks will want Targaryen blood. How do you plan to appease them? Rhaegar lowered his gaze briefly, thinking of the family that had died. By means of restitution and genuine rule of law. If the North and the other kingdoms see that a new ruler stands ready to hear their grievances and treat them fairly, perhaps the cycle of violence can end. I cannot bring back the dead, but I can do my best to honor the living. We will address all the wrongs that have been done. As for the Lannisters, the Tyrells, everyone else, I expect them to heed the authority of a new king, or they will face the consequences of supporting a madman. But I believe many will join us once they see that we are serious and united." Robert's eyes drifted to a torch sputtering in a bracket on the wall. Sparks danced in the flame, and he seemed to contemplate them as though they were images of future battles. Finally, he reached across the table. "Then we shall drink to it, Prince. You have yourself an ally, so long as you keep your word. 7 hells, I never thought I'd see the day." He let out a rough laugh that reverberated in the near-empty feast hall. Rhaegar raised his own cup, relief pooling in him. "Then let this be the first step to setting this realm to rights." They drank together. Thus began a conspiracy that would reshape the face of Westeros forever. Over the weeks that followed, Rhaegar moved carefully, forging alliances behind closed doors. He approached Jon Arryn through Robert, and it was no easy task to convince the proud and honorable Lord of the Vale that treason against the crown was the correct path. But the old lord's devotion to Robert and Ned, and his horror at the fates of Brandon and Rickard Stark, gave him reason to bend his ear. Word was quietly sent to Winterfell, offering apologies for what had happened at the hands of the king, and inviting Eddard Stark to a discreet meeting at Riverrun, hosted by Hoster Tully. The lords gathered under false pretext, a small wedding among lesser Tully cousins. Hoster Tully welcomed them with guarded warmth, understanding that if the crown prince was present, it must be significant. During the daytime, they attended feasts and tourney games in the courtyard, pretending all was well. But at night, the group convened in a small solar, servants sent away, guards doubled at the door, ensuring that no spies could overhear. Rhaegar would arrive hooded, with the Kingsguard's discreet escort, to speak with the men who might decide the fate of Westeros. Ned Stark was quiet, still reeling from the death of his father and brother. He harbored a natural distrust for anything bearing the Targaryen name. But Robert was there to reassure him, to stand by him, and to press upon him the sincerity of Rhaegar's purpose. Over the course of several tense nights, with words weighed carefully, Rhaegar laid out the reality of the king's madness, the immediate danger if King Aerys was allowed to remain unchallenged. There were arguments, accusations, tears, and at last, a reluctant acceptance that Prince Rhaegar might be telling the truth. For the sake of the realm, for the memory of the countless dead, they would join forces with him. So began the forging of an alliance that defied every rule of inheritance, loyalty, and tradition. Rhaegar knew full well the risk. At any sign of suspicion, the king's spies would swoop down. The King's Landing that Rhaegar had known as a boy grand, bustling with life, had become a city of fear. Even the gold cloaks were rife with watchers loyal to the king, quick to carry tales. But fortune, or perhaps the gods, favored them in those early days. Aerys was consumed with his own paranoia, obsessing over threats from Dorne or the possible betrayals from Tywin Lannister. He had no inkling that his own son was orchestrating a great rebellion within the kingdom. Months passed in this clandestine planning. Letters were exchanged in code, sealed with the sigils of lords who had begun to align themselves with the prince. The Martells, outraged by the king's treatment of Elia Martell, Rhaegar's own wife, and the general disrespect Aerys had shown to Dorne, also began to rally in secret. Prince Doran Martell was a careful and measured man, but he believed in Rhaegar's cause, if only to see Elia and her children safe. The Reach under Mace Tyrell was more cautious. House Tyrell was proud of its ties to the throne, but they had begun to see cracks in the alliance. The Tyrells feared the retribution if they chose the wrong side. They listened to Rhaegar's offers, but withheld open commitment. The Lannisters, aloof in their seat at Casterly Rock, had severed many ties with King's Landing after Tywin's resignation as Hand, but Tywin Lannister was too cunning to risk everything on a single roll of the dice. To the Crown Prince's frustration, the Lannisters remained non-committal, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. Meanwhile, Rhaegar and Robert found themselves growing warier and warier of discovery. Yet in that tension, a surprising bond began to form. Their meetings were stealthy, rarely in broad daylight. They would sit across from each other in stables, or in secluded corners of lords' halls, forging strategies, dividing tasks, and confirming loyalties. Robert, always a man to speak his mind, did not hesitate to tease the prince, an act unthinkable to many, but Rhaegar found in Robert's humor some relief from the heavy burdens on his own shoulders. They disagreed often, too, especially about the manner in which they would handle those who might remain loyal to Aerys. Robert's inclination was to crush them with force, while Rhaegar advocated for negotiation or peaceful persuasion where possible. Still, they discovered that both had a love for the common folk, for the men who toiled in fields and the women who tended shops, who would suffer the most if war ravaged the land. They found that both possessed an earnest desire to see a better Westeros, though they had imagined achieving it in opposite ways before. The moment finally came when their delicate conspiracy had to step out of the shadows. King Aerys announced his intention to have another great pyre of traitors in the courtyard of the Red Keep, though no one could say who these traitors were. Whispers circulated that he was gathering lords he disliked for trivial reasons and intended to execute them, along with certain members of the city's population who had been overheard making slights against him. The entire city grew tense, and it became clear to Rhaegar that if he did not act quickly, more innocent blood would be spilled. The Council of Conspirators met in the chamber at Riverrun for the last time before war. Jon Arryn, Ned Stark, Robert Baratheon, Hoster Tully, Edmure Tully, and other key lords pledged their swords and men. Ravens flew from quiet towers to muster the loyal banners. The Crown Prince gave word to Prince Lewin Martell of the Kingsguard and to Ser Arthur Dayne. They would begin preparing from within King's Landing, removing officers loyal to the king and placing men sympathetic to the cause. When Rhaegar returned to the city, he found it seething with unrest. The common folk whispered that the king intended to burn entire blocks if he felt threatened. Guards on the walls looked nervously out into the countryside, as if expecting an army to rise at any moment. Within the Red Keep, the tension was so thick that even the courtiers dared not speak above a murmur. King Aerys sat the Iron Throne, disheveled hair and wild eyes giving him the appearance of some monstrous wraith. He greeted his son with suspicious courtesy, demanding why Rhaegar spent so much time away from court. Rhaegar knelt and claimed to have been visiting lords to ensure their loyalty, an answer that seemed to satisfy the king, at least for the moment. In truth, Rhaegar had begun to gather those he trusted, quietly instructing them to stand ready for the signal. That signal came on a crisp morning, just as the sun rose over Blackwater Bay. Robert Baratheon led a force of Stormlanders, riding for King's Landing under the Baratheon banner, though they carried a hidden cause in their hearts. Behind them marched Eddard Stark and the men of the North, who had traveled a great distance, bypassing the usual roads, with urgent swiftness in their step. Jon Arryn assembled the Knights of the Vale to join them. It was not a massive army by the standards of a full-scale invasion, but it was well-led and determined. They knew precisely where they meant to strike. The gates of the city, where Rhaegar's loyal men among the gold cloaks would open the way for them. On the morning the allied army arrived outside the walls, King's Landing awoke to the sound of horns. The gold cloaks on the gates feigned confusion, but in truth, enough of them had been bought or persuaded by Rhaegar that they threw open the gatehouse. The Stormlanders and Northerners poured in. Robert, riding at the head of the host, roared for the King's Guard to stand aside. Some offered resistance, loyal officers who had not been replaced, but they were swiftly disarmed. Panic coursed through the city, rumors spreading that Robert Baratheon was storming King's Landing to claim the crown. Some believed it was a rehash of old Targaryen conflicts, others believed it was a revolt. But the truth was more complicated, and soon they heard that Rhaegar himself was riding to the main courtyard with his armor polished and the dragon sigil displayed. King Aerys, perched upon the Iron Throne, sensed the betrayal too late. He commanded pyromancers to unleash wildfire throughout the city, but by that time, Ser Arthur Dayne and Prince Lewin Martell had already taken the key storerooms where the wildfire was kept, capturing the alchemists who controlled it. By the time the king gave the order, the men in place refused to carry it out, some because they were threatened, some because they saw the tide turning. Aerys raged, calling for his Kingsguard to kill his son. But Barristan Selmy, Ser Gerald Hightower, and the others had pledged loyalty to the rightful heir, Prince Rhaegar. Barristan came forward, sword drawn, and told the king he would not commit regicide, but neither would he kill Rhaegar. Aerys howled and threatened to burn them all, but his words carried no weight. At last, Rhaegar entered the throne room, flanked by Robert Baratheon, Ned Stark, Jon Arryn, and several knights of the Kingsguard. There was a hush as they beheld the final confrontation. In that moment, Aerys looked less like a king and more like a caged beast. His filthy nails clutched at the steel blades that jutted from the throne, even as he shrank away from his son's unwavering gaze. Rhaegar's voice rang out, clear and sorrowful. "Father, you must step down. You have brought destruction upon the realm, and it must end." The king spat, screaming curses and damning them all. He reached for a hidden dagger beneath his robes. Quick as a flash, Ser Barristan Selmy's hand shot out, catching the king's wrist. A moment later, the dagger clattered to the floor. The silence was deafening. Robert Baratheon, breathing hard from the rush of storming the city, watched with a grin set to his lips. Ned Stark stared at the king who had murdered his father and brother, eyes cold as the heart of winter. Jon Arryn bowed his head, as if in sorrow for the realm that had come to this. Rhaegar stepped closer, pity etched upon his face. "It is over," he said quietly. Aerys' eyes burned with fury. He opened his mouth to spew yet another threat, but then, as if the final shred of his mind cracked, he collapsed into a broken fit of sobbing. The hall watched in stunned silence as the once terrible ruler was led away under guard, stripped of his regal garments. Rhaegar Targaryen, rightful heir, stood in that massive throne room, sunlight pouring in through the high windows, shining upon the blood-red carpet that led to the steps of the Iron Throne. He turned to the assembled lords, as if uncertain for a moment. Robert laid a hand on the prince's shoulder. Then Rhaegar swallowed, stepped forward, and claimed the throne. It was done. The Mad King was deposed, and by the Crown Prince's own hand, aided by the might of House Baratheon, Stark, Arryn, Tully, and their loyal bannermen. The realm breathed a collective sigh of relief, though it was tinged with both joy and dread. What would come next? Over the following weeks, King Aerys was confined to his chambers, guarded night and day. There were whispers of an execution. Many in the north demanded his head in retribution for Rhaegar and Brandon Stark, not to mention countless others who had met fiery ends. But Rhaegar, newly crowned King Rhaegar I Targaryen, sought a more measured form of justice. He convened a special court, inviting witnesses to testify to Aerys' atrocities. It was a spectacle unlike any other. Lords and small folk alike came to recount how the king had tortured or murdered their kinsmen. Aerys, trembling and seething, was forced to stand in chains. In the end, justice demanded a sentence. Rhaegar conferred with his new hand of the king, Lord Jon Arryn, and the rest of his small council, which included Robert Baratheon, Eddard Stark, and a reluctant Hoster Tully. They decided upon the severest punishment. The former king was to spend the rest of his days in a solitary cell in the Red Keep, stripped of his titles, never again to see the light of freedom. Some called it mercy, others called it cruelty to leave him alive, but Rhaegar believed it was not his place to shed his father's blood, even if many argued it was right to do so. The realm spoke of this decision with mixed voices, but none could deny that a new era had begun. In the new king's coronation ceremony, the great September of Baelor brimmed with nobility and commoners alike. King Rhaegar stood at the altar, wearing the crown of Aegon the Conqueror, which had been brought forth from the royal treasury. Ser Arthur Dayne, now Lord Commander of the Kingsguard following Ser Gerald Hightower's abdication of the role, stood guard. Elia Martell stood beside Rhaegar, crowned as queen, though the tensions there were delicate. Everyone wondered how the alliance of the dragon and the stag would shape the future. Robert, standing among the lords, wore formal garments for once, though he tugged at the collar impatiently. Ned Stark stood next to him, eyes solemn. As the High Septon placed the crown upon Rhaegar's head, the watchers in the sept, and the thousands outside cheered. Many believed Rhaegar would be a wise and just king, or at least a better king than his father. Some whispered that a Targaryen would always be mad or great. Time would tell. The immediate tasks of the new reign were daunting. With Robert's counsel, Rhaegar sought to mend the wounds left by his father. He visited the north, offering personal condolences to Ned Stark for the deaths of Brandon and Rhaegar. He granted new privileges and recompense to House Stark, ensuring the North's support. Robert returned home to Storm's End a hero to his own people, who sang songs of how their lord had helped overthrow a tyrant and place the rightful king on the throne. But beyond these gestures, the new king recognized the realm's broader needs: tax relief for war-torn or impoverished regions, rebuilding neglected roads and granaries, forging alliances through marriages and feasts. The Tullus were granted certain honors, reinforcing their importance in the new order. Jon Arryn, given the handship, began reforms to strengthen the rule of law and reduce corruption. The Martells, satisfied that their daughter Elia was now queen, pledged men and wealth to the crown to ensure stability, though the ghost of the king's prior disrespect still haunted them. The Tyrells, seeing that Rhaegar had seized the throne with broad support, finally bent the knee wholeheartedly, seeking the new king's favor in trade agreements and future alliances. The Lannisters, ever watchful, played a delicate game. Tywin sent polite congratulations, along with a measure of gold, but he made no immediate moves to entwine House Lannister too closely with the new regime. Rhaegar responded with courtesy, hoping to keep the influential Lion of the West on his side. All was not perfectly smooth, of course. The presence of a dethroned king in the Red Keep remained a sore point for many. Whispers in taverns across the realm speculated on whether some Targaryen loyalists might still try to restore Aerys. There were also rumors swirling around Rhaegar's personal relationships. Some still insisted that he and Lyanna Stark had been enthralled with each other at the tourney at Harrenhal. Others said that Queen Elia's frail health was a reason Rhaegar might eventually seek a new wife, or a second marriage that would unite the realm further. Robert himself grew a bit uneasy about these rumors. The old spark of jealousy that had been a kindling for a future war still flickered in him. But whenever the question arose, Rhaegar dismissed it calmly, stating that House Stark and House Baratheon were both essential pillars of the new peace. Ned Stark's wedding to Catelyn Tully took place during this time of tentative hope. King Rhaegar and Queen Elia attended the ceremony, as did Robert Baratheon, who made a boisterous toast to the bride and groom, praising Ned for his steadfastness. It was a lavish affair at Riverrun, filled with laughter and enough wine to drown out any lingering suspicions that might remain among the lords. That night, Rhaegar and Robert shared a rare moment together on the battlements, overlooking the moonlit waters. Robert, in a moment of frankness, said, "We did what we set out to do. The Mad King is gone, and you sit the throne. But will we truly keep the peace? Rhaegar, will the lords remain content?" Rhaegar sipped from a goblet of wine. "That depends on us," he replied softly, "on whether we govern justly, address their needs, and do not give them cause to rise against us. Westeros has known enough bloodshed. The lords want peace or at least stability. I believe we can provide it. With your help, Robert." Robert sighed, leaning on the battlements. "I can swing a warhammer. I can lead men into battle. Peace," he grimaced. "It's not something I'm well suited for, I fear." Rhaegar placed a hand on his shoulder. "It will take time to adjust. You're a hero to the realm now, Robert. Your name alone will serve as a deterrent to any who might dream of rebellion. Besides, the realm's people love a champion. There is no greater champion than you. Use that fame to keep them united." Robert didn't answer for a moment, gazing at the reflection of the moon on the dark waters below. Then he huffed a laugh. "All right, but if you start showing signs of madness, my friend, I swear by the gods I'll be the first to knock you off that damned throne." Rhaegar smiled faintly. "I expect no less." Word spread through the realm of the blossoming friendship between the new king and the Lord of Storm's End. The people found it comforting, a sign that the great houses were united. Trade blossomed. Farmers saw fewer taxes. Soldiers demobilized, returning to tend fields and crafts. The realm seemed to be breathing freely again after years under the dark shadow of the Mad King. However, no reign is free of conflict. Small rebellions sprang up here and there, mostly remnants of those who still held some twisted loyalty to the dethroned Ares or who saw the chaos of the transition as an opportunity for banditry. The largest of these rebellions erupted in the Crownlands, led by a minor lord outraged at the idea of a Targaryen turning on his own father. Claiming some spurious tie to House Targaryen, he whipped up a handful of knights and sellswords to proclaim that only a pure Targaryen should rule. This ragged group of rebels attacked travelers on the Rosby Road and threatened to raid the outskirts of King's Landing. Robert and Ned led a contingent of the newly reformed royal army to confront them. The rebels proved to be poorly organized. Their small band was overwhelmed quickly by the disciplined forces of the crown. Robert, in the thick of battle, crushed the rebel leader's sword with one swing of his warhammer, and Ned Stark disarmed his lieutenant. The rebellion ended before it could truly begin. Dozens were captured and brought to the city for justice. King Rhaegar, seated on the Iron Throne, sentenced the ringleaders to death and consigned the lesser offenders to labor in the King's Landing dungeons. To some watchers, it was a chilling reminder that Rhaegar could be stern when the realm's peace was threatened. Though a measure of stability reigned, alliances needed constant tending. Queen Elia, increasingly frail, spent more time resting in the Red Keep. Her children, young Prince Aegon and Princess Rhaenys, brought new joy to the court, endearing themselves to lords and small folk alike with their spirited antics. Yet Rhaegar worried about Elia's health, consulting maesters and healers to do all they could. Meanwhile, he entertained a new wave of proposals from foreign rulers: marriages to connect the Targaryen line with Essos, or trade treaties for ports in the Narrow Sea. Such matters required considerable tact and time, but Rhaegar proved patient and attentive, determined to keep the realm from fracturing under external pressures. Lyanna Stark also arrived in King's Landing, escorted by her brothers Ned and Benjen, to pay respects to the new king as a symbolic gesture of House Stark's commitment. She was set to wed Robert soon, and the match was hailed by many as the union of the stag and the wolf that had helped topple the dragon. Lyanna carried herself with an independent, proud bearing that many found reminiscent of the she-wolf stories told about her. She was wary of the Targaryens and uncertain about her marriage to Robert, whose drinking and famed appetites she found off-putting. But she understood the political necessity. For his part, Robert was enthralled by her, though her occasional sharpness left him baffled and frustrated. He was unused to a woman who matched his boldness. When Lyanna and Rhaegar crossed paths in the Red Keep's gardens one bright afternoon, there was a moment of silent tension. They both paused by a hedge of blooming roses, nodding politely. Rumors swirled around them, insisting that they had once danced together at the tourney at Harrenhal, that sparks had flown. None of these stories could be confirmed. Now they stood face to face, she in a pale gray gown trimmed with the direwolf sigil, he in a simple tunic embroidered with dragons, the weight of the crown not upon his brow at this moment. He inclined his head. "My Lady Stark, I trust your journey was comfortable?" She looked at him with those keen gray eyes that seemed to reflect the harsh northern skies. "It was, Your Grace. We have you to thank for the safety of the roads these days." Rhaegar nodded. "I am pleased to hear it. The realm was in chaos for too long." They both fell silent. Any illusions that might have existed in another life, where they might have become entangled in romance or tragedy, had no place here. Too much had changed. The kingdom had needed Robert and Rhaegar together against Ares, and thus, any romance that might have blossomed between Rhaegar and Lyanna, if it had been more than rumor, had no future. Lyanna, for her part, studied Rhaegar's calm features, searching for signs of the Mad King in him. Perhaps. She found none. He was sad, regal, and polite. She broke the silence. "I hope that the North can trust your rule, Your Grace. My brother Ned believes in you. If you keep your promises, perhaps the realm can truly heal." Rhaegar inclined his head again. "I will do my utmost. I pray I never give cause for regret. And I wish you happiness with Lord Baratheon." She mustered a small smile, her cheeks coloring slightly. "Thank you, Your Grace. I suppose we shall see how that goes." They parted ways with a polite bow. The court gossips who saw their exchange whispered and spun their own stories, but the reality was less dramatic. Two people, once rumored to be star-crossed, now shaped by the new order they had helped create, forging separate paths for the good of the realm. As time flowed on, the wedding of Robert Baratheon and Lyanna Stark became the next grand event in this new era. The day dawned bright and hot, the sun beating down on King's Landing. Nobles from every corner of Westeros arrived to witness the union, to admire the splendor of the capital that no longer reeked of Aerys' tyranny. The Great September was bedecked with fresh flowers, gold ornamentation, and banners bearing the sigils of House Baratheon and House Stark. King Rhaegar and Queen Elia presided over the festivities, accompanied by their children. Robert stood at the altar in his finest attire, shifting nervously despite his bravado, perhaps more anxious about marriage than he would ever be about battle. Lyanna walked down the aisle with Ned at her side, her gray eyes scanning the crowd, her heart pounding in her chest. The rites were performed, oaths exchanged. Robert placed a ring on her finger, and she placed another on his. With a solemn vow, they were bound. The celebratory feast was a spectacle. Robert led the charge in revelry, draining horn after horn of ale. Lyanna eventually joined him, letting out a rare laugh at some bawdy toast he gave. Dancers whirled on the floor, lords and ladies played courtly games of conversation, knights and squires boasted of justs. King Rhaegar took a moment to slip away to a side corridor with Ned Stark, congratulating him not just on his sister's wedding but on his own union to Catelyn Tully. They spoke quietly of the state of the North, of the realm's readiness for winter. Ned, always reserved, told Rhaegar that the trust was growing, that the Northmen who had once yearned for vengeance were beginning to see the wisdom of the new king's decisions. Rhaegar exhaled with relief, thanking the gods for each day the peace held. Yet peace was always tenuous. There were still lords in Westeros with ambitions unsatisfied, with old grudges smoldering. Tywin Lannister, though outwardly cordial, might be planning something behind the scenes. The Iron Islands, sullen beneath House Greyjoy, occasionally tested the waters with raids. In the stepstones beyond Dorne, pirates prowled and threatened shipping lanes. King Rhaegar's small council strove to address these issues, dispatching envoys, building alliances, and preparing for the possibility of conflict, but striving to keep the realm from plunging into full war. Even in peacetime, there were challenges. The crown's coffers, once drained by Aerys' lavish spending and twisted projects, needed to be replenished. Craftsmen worked day and night to produce goods for trade. With Jon Arryn's prudent administration, the royal treasury slowly grew. The roads that led from King's Landing to the Westerlands, to the Reach, to the Riverlands, were repaired and guarded, encouraging merchants to travel more freely. The gold cloaks were reorganized to reduce corruption, now answering directly to the king and his hand. For the first time in many years, there was a sense of optimism on the streets, especially among the small folk who did not fear the king's retribution at every turn. Meanwhile, Robert Baratheon's star continued to rise. The songs of minstrels recounted how he had joined forces with the crown prince to depose a mad tyrant. Poets praised his valor and unbreakable spirit. His marriage to Lyanna became a story of beauty and passion, though in truth, the couple had their share of heated arguments behind closed doors. They were both fierce, unyielding personalities. Lyanna was not content to play the demure lady, and Robert possessed a wandering eye and a thirst for drink that tested her patience. Yet at the grand feasts, they displayed a united front, acknowledging that the realm watched them as living symbols of the new alliance. Rhaegar, in turn, found a surprising sense of companionship with Robert at council meetings or the training yard. Sometimes, they sparred before an audience of knights and squires. Robert loved to show off his brute strength, swinging his hammer to send opponents flying. Rhaegar danced around him with a longsword, using technique and speed. Their friendly competitions became legendary, each man winning sometimes, losing sometimes. Ser Barristan Selmy joked that the realm could settle any disputes by letting the king and Lord Baratheon duel it out in the yard, rather than on the battlefield. But for every shared laugh, Rhaegar was reminded of the precarious balance he maintained. Could the realm truly accept a Targaryen who had turned on his father? Could House Baratheon and House Targaryen trust each other enough to prevent future bloodshed? He thought of the tragic conflicts of House Blackfyre in the past, how the Targaryens had torn themselves apart through internal strife. Aerys's madness had nearly plunged them into civil war. Now Rhaegar's very legitimacy rested on the success of his rule. He had promised justice, mercy, and stability. He strived every day to uphold those promises. He regularly visited the small folk, hearing their petitions. He welcomed each region's delegates, forging trade pacts that benefited all sides. He even consulted with the Citadel to ensure that the watch against winter was properly maintained, sending additional support to the Night's Watch. If any Targaryen was to break the cyclical horrors of the past, it would have to be him. As the years continued to pass, a sense of guarded hope spread through the land. Queen Alia's health waned further, to the sorrow of all. She had moments of lucidity and vitality where she attended ceremonies or read to her children in the gardens. But these spells grew fewer and further between. Prince Aegon and Princess Rhaenys grew before the court's eyes, blossoming into bright, personable children who had learned from their father's example. Whenever they laughed or ran in the halls, people glimpsed a future they prayed would remain free of war. Lyanna Baratheon, formerly Stark, grew into her role as Lady of Storm's End, though she rarely allowed the courtiers or lords to treat her as a mere figurehead. She championed causes of the small folk in her region, insisting that Robert handle the repairs to roads and the harbor, pushing him to be more responsible. Robert grumbled, but deep down he admired her resolve. That admiration did not stop him from his boisterous ways, but he did attempt more restraint than in his younger days, for her sake, or so it was said. Ned Stark returned to Winterfell, content to rule the north with Catelyn by his side, raising their children in the old halls where the direwolf sigils adorned every wall. He visited King's Landing occasionally for council sessions, always greeted warmly by Rhaegar, though the quiet Northman never seemed entirely comfortable with the southern court. In King's Landing, signs of the old terror slowly faded. The Red Keep bustled with visitors from across the narrow sea, with lords from the Reach and the Stormlands, with knights and minstrels seeking patronage. Rhaegar occasionally played his harp in private gatherings, a practice from his youth that brought him solace. At such times, Robert would mock him good-naturedly. "Play us a tune that'll rouse me to fight a dragon, Rhaegar," and Rhaegar would retort with a quiet smirk, strumming a gentle lullaby instead. The mingling of the two men's temperaments continued to puzzle the realm, but it worked in its own way. When the crown needed a firm presence, Robert could thunder. When it needed a gentle approach, Rhaegar would step forward. They formed a surprisingly complementary pair, giving the realm the stability it so desperately needed. Meanwhile, Aerys Targaryen languished in his cell, rarely spoken of except in hushed corners. Some whispered that the flame of his hatred still burned bright, that he spent his days muttering curses against his son. Others said he had fallen into a catatonic state, barely acknowledging the world around him. In either case, only the guards and a few maesters ever saw him. Rhaegar visited once, early in his reign, intending to see if any vestige of fatherly love remained. He found only a shell of a man, ranting about false dragons and the usurpers who destroyed his kingdom. Rhaegar left, his heart heavy with sorrow and relief that a new chapter had begun. From dawn to dusk, year after year, King Rhaegar's rule took shape. In the Riverlands, new irrigation projects aided farmers. In the Westerlands, mining expansions brought in gold, shared with the crown in exchange for improvements to roads and strongholds. In the north, Ned Stark oversaw the rebuilding of the war-torn holdings that had once been neglected. Dorne enjoyed a closer relationship to the crown, though simmering resentment over Aerys's past misdeeds sometimes flared, quickly soothed by the presence of Elia Martell as queen. The Vale, governed by Jon Arryn's steady hand, prospered, and the Stormlands flourished under Robert, who thrived on the respect he had garnered. Gradually, the stories of the rebellion that never was took on a legendary hue. People sang of how the noble crown prince, seeing the rot in his father's mind, turned to the mightiest warrior in the land, Robert Baratheon, and together they freed Westeros from tyranny. Ballads about Rhaegar and Robert were performed in inns and manors, though they often romanticized or simplified the truth. Some sang that Robert had single-handedly defeated the entire Kingsguard, that Rhaegar had broken down the doors of the throne room with a single blow. Reality was more complicated, but the spirit of hope those songs captured was real. Yet a certain question lingered in the air, unspoken but potent. What of prophecy? Rhaegar Targaryen had, in his youth, been obsessed with the idea of the prince that was promised, the legendary figure destined to save the realm from an otherworldly threat. Some rumored that Rhaegar believed himself to be that prince, or perhaps his children. Now, with the realm at peace, the question of prophecy was overshadowed by the daily tasks of governance. Still, every so often, Rhaegar would glance into the flames of the royal hearth, recalling the visions that had once guided him. The time to confront that prophecy might still be distant, but in his heart, he believed that the realm's unity was essential to face any coming darkness. As the children of the new generation grew, Aegon, Rhaenys, Robb Stark, Sansa Stark, and others, some wondered if a further alliance might someday be forged through marriage between houses. Such speculation circulated among the lords, who were ever eager to secure their line's advantage. Rhaegar did not confirm or deny any potential betrothals. He seemed content to let his children grow and learn, though he did ensure that they built friendships with other heirs across the realm. That was part of his dream. A Westeros tied together not merely by politics, but by genuine understanding and camaraderie among its future leaders. In time, Queen Alia's condition deteriorated. She fell into a deep sickness, and the Maester declared that she might not have much time left. King Rhaegar spent many nights by her bedside, holding her hand, reading old stories of the Dornish heroes who once soared across the sands. She smiled faintly, occasionally speaking of how proud she was of their children and how she hoped they would grow into strong and just leaders. The court, recognizing the sorrow that lay over the Red Keep, kept a subdued atmosphere. Even Robert, boisterous as he was, toned down his feasts in respect for the Queen's failing health. When Queen Elia passed away in the quiet hours of an early morning, the bells of the city tolled. The realm mourned. She was laid to rest with full honors in the royal crypts, and thousands gathered to pay final tribute. Dorne sent a grand delegation, led by Prince Doran, who embraced the king and his children in genuine grief. This moment tested the bonds that had been formed, for if Dorne felt slighted or believed the new king had not done enough to keep Elia safe, it could sow discord. But the Martells honored Rhaegar's devotion to her, and there was no sign of enmity. Instead, there was communal sorrow that a gentle soul had departed too soon. Rhaegar emerged from mourning pale but resolute, dedicating himself even more to the cause of unity for which Elia had stood. Life marched on. In the wake of Elia's death, rumors arose once more. Might the king take another wife? Some lords even suggested that a marriage between Rhaegar and Lyanna Stark could bring the realm closer, forgetting or ignoring that she was Robert's lawful wife. Others proposed highborn ladies of the Reach, the Vale, or the Westerlands as possible queens. Rhaegar took no immediate action. He remained quietly in grief, more focused on raising his children and ruling effectively. Yet behind the scenes, diplomatic suggestions piled up. If Rhaegar wed again and produced more heirs, the future of the Targaryen dynasty would be more secure. Robert and Ned offered no opinion publicly, but one evening, over cups of strong wine, Robert joked that if Rhaegar ever tried to take Lyanna, the whole realm would come undone again. There was a flicker of tension in that jest, a reminder that old wounds still lurked in hearts. But Rhaegar merely gave a weary smile, letting the subject pass. Seasons turned, and winter approached. The days grew shorter, the nights colder, especially in the north. Rhaegar took counsel with the maesters, ordering shipments of grain and supplies to be sent to regions that would suffer most. He commanded the building of new granaries and the expansion of roads so that aid could flow when the snows fell. He also consulted with the Night's Watch, who reported troubling signs beyond the wall, whispers of wildling gatherings, strange omens. He took these reports seriously, quietly mustering men and provisions for the watch, strengthening the castle garrisons. The lords murmured that the king was wise to prepare for the worst, that the White Walkers were but a bedtime story, but he insisted on caution. Some believed it was that old prophecy haunting him, prompting him to ensure the realm would be ready should dark forces ever come south. All the while, Robert Baratheon lived fully. He fathered a son with Lyanna, whom they named Stefan, after Robert's father. The boy was sturdy and boisterous, quick to laugh. When Robert traveled to King's Landing with Lyanna and little Stefan, the crowds cheered them as the heroes of the realm's new dawn. Robert would grin and wave, shouting half-drunk jokes and bestowing coins on the children who ran alongside his horse. Lyanna, at times, seemed to beam with pride at her son's acceptance, though she never fully lost that edge of northern steel. At the royal court, Prince Aegon trained in the yard under Ser Barristan Selmy's tutelage, displaying an aptitude for swordsmanship and a keen mind for strategy. Princess Rhaenys studied languages and history, showing a knack for diplomacy. They were the living legacy of the Targaryen Martell Union, admired by courtiers for their beauty and intelligence. They often sparred playfully with Stefan Baratheon or with the Stark children who visited from Winterfell, forging bonds that Rhaegar prayed would last a lifetime. Amid these hopeful signs, the realm did not forget the cost of change. The memory of Aerys' cruelty and the rebellion that never was, the short, decisive action that put Rhaegar on the throne, lingered in ballads and cautionary tales. Some lords quietly debated whether the Targaryens might descend into madness again. Others claimed that by uniting with Robert Baratheon, the Targaryens had proven they could adopt the strengths of the stags and the wolves, taming the dragon's fire. Only the future would confirm which vision prevailed. As the sun set on the 5th year of King Rhaegar's reign, the king walked the battlements of the Red Keep alone, the autumn wind catching at his silver hair. He gazed out over Blackwater Bay, the waters reflecting the orange glow of dusk. He thought of how different the city looked now compared to the days of his father's rule. The fires of fear and madness had been replaced by the lantern lights of prosperity. The scrawled graffiti cursing the Targaryen name had been cleaned away, replaced by the occasional placard praising the new reign. A gentle hush lay over the city, as if it too were pausing to see what the next dawn would bring. He heard a voice behind him. "Your Grace, you'll catch a chill out here." It was Robert, stepping out from the shadows, a wineskin in hand. He joined Rhaegar at the battlements, leaning forward as he peered at the city. "This is a fine vantage point." Rhaegar gave a slight smile. "It is. I come here sometimes to think, to remember what we've done and what still needs doing." Robert took a swig from the wineskin, then offered it to Rhaegar, who sipped politely. "I used to dream of smashing your father's men with my hammer," Robert said quietly, the wind tugging at his dark hair. "Now I stand in King's Landing as a friend of House Targaryen. The gods have a sense of humor, don't they?" Rhaegar let out a soft chuckle. "They do indeed. But if the gods see us forging a better future, perhaps they'll give us their blessing." Robert patted him on the back, a gesture of uncharacteristic affection. "Maybe so. You've done well, Rhaegar. Better than I would have expected. I like to think I played a part in it." "You played a tremendous part," Rhaegar said, turning to face him. "None of this would have been possible without you. If you hadn't agreed to hear me out, if you hadn't believed that there was a chance to save this realm from my father without burning it to ash, we'd be living in a very different world." Robert's grin lit up his face. "All I needed was a good cause. You gave me one, and also a chance to become a hero of the realm, which I can hardly resist. But don't misunderstand, I still watch you carefully. If I ever see you teetering on the edge of madness—" Rhaegar raised a hand with a faint laugh, cutting him off. "I remember your promise, and I welcome it. I'd expect nothing less from the Storm Lord. Let the entire realm keep watch, not out of suspicion, but out of an earnest commitment to ensure no king again plunges Westeros into ruin." Robert made a non-committal sound, then turned to gaze at the horizon. "Well, the realm is a big place. Even with peace, we'll have our share of bandits, lords plotting in secret, maybe a Greyjoy or two thinking about rebellion. We can't rest easy, but I prefer fighting them to living under Aerys' shadow." Rhaegar nodded. "As do I. I only wish my father had not fallen so far." A moment of thoughtful silence passed. Yet perhaps, from his downfall, we can learn. If power corrupts and isolation breeds madness, then we must remain open to counsel, to friendships. Let that guide us both. He turned, offering Robert back the wineskin. You'll always be welcome in King's Landing, my friend. Robert accepted the wineskin, smirking. Just make sure the ale doesn't run dry. Then he cast his gaze at the last rays of the sun sinking below the horizon. To the future, Rhaegar. Gods help us keep it peaceful. They stood there, side by side, two pillars supporting the new era. One, the silver-haired Dragon King, tempered by sorrow, determined to prove that the Targaryen line could rule with wisdom. The other, the broad-shouldered Storm Lord, boisterous and loyal, an equal partner in forging the stability the realm so desperately needed. Their story had begun with the threat of war, but it ended, for now, in a hard-won camaraderie that spared Westeros from years of bloody rebellion. The wind ruffled their cloaks as dusk settled over King's Landing, and the bells of the city chimed the hour. Behind them, the Red Keep's torches flared to life, illuminating the ancient stones with a warm glow. In that glow, one might see the reflection of hope. A hope that this alliance, this partnership, would anchor the realm through the storms yet to come. And though the future remained uncertain, at that moment, Westeros was at peace, ruled by a king and supported by a lord who had once been mortal enemies in another fate. Their decision to join hands instead of crossing swords had changed everything, promising a dawn of unity after the long night of madness.